This is Michael Popok, Legal AF, reporting on developments about Donald Trump's reaction to the impending indictment likely to come this week or next by Jack Smith in the Lago criminal prosecution. He's had two reactions, two major ones I want to cover here right now so that you're in the know on this hot take. One, he's told those closest around him that he is creating a purge list listing Department of Justice and FBI personnel, lawyers and investigators who are working on the various grand jury and other criminal indictment investigations against him, because when he gets back into office, this is his view, he will purge the Department of Justice, he will purge the FBI of all the people that worked against him. This is how Donald Trump thinks. This is why he's unfit for office. And yet there is a hard 30% or more of his base, or 30% of the Republican Party, which is his base, that will only vote for Trump and always vote for Trump, regardless of the fact that he'll be indicted, potentially convicted, and twice impeached. It doesn't matter to them. This is the candidate that you are choosing, a candidate who has retribution and retaliation and lust for that in his mind, in his heart, who is making a mole hunt list to remove people that were just doing their job. Now, this is not going to affect in the least, in a way favorable to Donald Trump, the news, the reporting that he's creating this purge list. It's only going to make those prosecutors and investigators who are career professionals work that much harder, more focus, more diligence in doing their job. It's all they do from the moment they get up in the morning to the moment they go to bed at night. I've worked on investigations. They're just chopping wood, chop, chop, chop. And now they're really focused because of the attacks, I'm sure, by Donald Trump against them. So don't worry it's going to have any impact. It isn't. But the fact that he would announce, or it's now been leaked, that he wants to find out all the people that are against him so that he can take them out and remove them as soon as he gets there, including Christopher Wray, the FBI director, which I'd like to remind Donald Trump in 2017, he nominated Christopher Wray for the job. He'd like them all removed now because they're all against him. That's the first thing. And we know that Donald Trump is doing that because secretly he's making the purge list, but publicly he's attacking, again, prosecutors, the Department of Justice, and the FBI, undermining their reputation in the eyes of Americans, including going to, talk about embarrassing. I mean, I'm sure the FBI was very, very upset by the fact that a couple of weeks ago he went to Waco, Texas, on the eve of one of the biggest disasters in FBI history, was the Branch Davidian attempted arrest and the fire that ensued and the death of those children and followers of David Koresh. That's where Republicans, that's where your nominee, likely nominee, went to hold a rally, right? This dark day. And one he thinks embolizes and symbolizes an out-of-control FBI. And he's on their side, the people's side. And there he called the FBI and the Department of Justice thugs and criminals. This is a Republican? I thought Republicans were law and order. I thought they were in favor of police, law enforcement, FBI, and judges. Not since Donald Trump has taken over and co-opted the party. And it's become spineless. Thugs and criminals corruptly going after him. Same thing he used to do against the media, which he called the enemy of the people. This person's fit for office. This is the best person that the Republican Party can find to come out of the primaries. A multiply indicted, potentially convicted by that point, twice impeached, a judge sex abuser. That's your best. That's your best and your brightest. That's where we are. That's the first wave of attack by Donald Trump. The second one is that they are understandably, his lawyers and advisors around him are understandably worried about all of the lawyers that have been forced and compelled to testify against Donald Trump. And let me remind you who they are. Evan Corcoran, who was his lead lawyer for both Mar-a-Lago and the Jan 6 interference. Trump was stripped of his attorney-client privilege, and Evan Corcoran had to testify to the grand jury because the judge, the chief judge in District of Columbia at the time, found that Evan Corcoran and Donald Trump, more likely than not, participated in a crime related to the documents, Espionage Act and obstruction being first and second among them. which the crime fraud exception removes the attorney-client privilege. That's how the attorney-client privilege got stripped from all these people. It's the crime fraud exception, meaning there had to be a finding by a federal judge that there was a crime or fraud. Christina Bobb, who assisted Evan Corcoran, who signed now that notorious document under penalty of perjury that she had done a diligent search and only found 34 documents at Mar-a-Lago. Just missed it by this much. There were 13,000 documents plus 100 top secret and classified documents. So close, Christina, and too bad you signed it under penalty of perjury. So you had to testify under the crime fraud exception. Alina Habba, which people are like, what does she do besides go on cable news? Not much. She doesn't do much in the courtrooms, had no success. She's 0 for everything, including getting herself and Donald Trump fined $1 million down in Florida. Alina Habba had to testify in the Mar-a-Lago case. People forget, stripped of attorney-client privilege because, she was handling the case of the civil fraud case in New York, and they were missing documents there. She said, I'll go get them. She did them herself. Always smart. Flew down to Mar-a-Lago, went in there. Trump unlocked it. Maybe it was Walt Nauta, the personal assistant valet, and she went rummaging around the filing cabinets and desk drawer for Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago before the Department of Justice executed its search warrant. So they had a few questions to ask her in front of the grand jury. And then the two main lawyers that were White House counsel for Donald Trump, Patrick Cipollone and Pat Philbin, they got stripped of their attorney-client privilege and they had to testify. So you got all these lawyers testifying. So now they're whining and crying on the defense side, to the media at least. And they're saying, oh, big bad Department of Justice was mean to us, the way they asked those questions of those attorneys in the grand jury. And they're going to try to argue that they can attack the indictment that's coming. They know it's coming. That's why they met today for 2 hours with Jack Smith to try to ward off and fend off and cut off at the pass the prosecution. Hint, spoiler alert, not going to happen. He's going to be indicted this week. It's too late, and they don't have any countervailing evidence that's going to convince Jack Smith to not indict. But now they're saying, well, those lawyers were roughly handled by the Department of Justice, as was the privilege. Here's a newsflash. There was a court proceeding about the application of the privilege in front of two separate chief judges. Trump lost every time. His attorney-client privilege was taken away from him every time for all the lawyers that I just listed. And if they didn't like it, which sometimes they didn't, they took an appeal at the D.C. Court of Appeals, and they lost that. And then they reached out to the Supreme Court, who rejected it. So it is an ironclad, airtight ruling by a federal judge. Now, take that into the grand jury. If some of these witnesses don't like the way they were treated, Corcoran, Bob, Habba, Cipollone, or Philbin, they had a place to go. They had redress. They say, stop. I don't think I'm being asked questions or I'm being forced to answer questions inconsistent with the court's order. You're allowed to do that if you're a witness, and everything screeches to a halt, right? And they stop the proceeding to give that person time to bounce out, file a paper, and appear in front of the presiding chief judge of all things grand jury and make the argument. I don't think this is consistent. They asked me this question. I gave this answer. I think you only wanted me to answer X, Y, and Z. We're on topics far afield from that. What do you think, Judge? Judge says no, or yes, or I agree, or get back in the chair. But they didn't do any of that. There's no reporting that any grand jury proceeding involving these attorneys stopped because they objected to how they were being treated so they could go out and make the argument. So they waived. It's called waiver. They waived the argument. They can't argue. You can't say, I mentally objected, or new lawyers months later are now trying to take pot shots at it. There's an appeal process. There's a court process that supervises grand juries, and you have to exercise your rights or you waive them. And so you're going to hear, because they're starting this drumbeat in the media from the defense team about the attorney-client privilege being a problematic for Jack Smith. I'll tell you one person who doesn't believe that, or two people, is Jack Smith and the presiding judge over the grand juries. So don't worry about this news reporting that you may be hearing. I think I'm here on this hot take to tell you, don't worry. Don't worry about it. You'll hear misinformation also along the way. There was misinformation today by a mainstream media outlet that will remain nameless because it happens. They said that it was Evan Corcoran who resigned as Trump's lawyer for Mar-a-Lago because he's in the crosshairs of being a target himself, that Evan Corcoran along with Rowland and Halleck, the two other lawyers, met with Jack Smith. He didn't. It was Jim Trusty. They sort of look alike, but not really. But that was the initial on the wire reporting this morning. And I looked at it like, why is Evan Corcoran, who's a witness at best and a target of the criminal proceeding at worst, why is he meeting with these other two lawyers to Jack Smith? Makes no sense. He was either there, if he was there, Evan Corcoran, as a witness to be prepped by Jack Smith, or they got the reporting wrong. And they got the reporting wrong because it was corrected by another media outlet an hour or so later that, no, that's not Corcoran, that's Jim Trusty, the one remaining lawyer for Donald Trump on Mar-a-Lago that's still around and hasn't been forced to testify. So that's where we are at the current moment. I cover this on Hot Takes on about a daily basis, sometimes hourly, depending upon what's happening, at the intersection of law and U.S. politics. I'm a practicing attorney, been doing this for over 32 years when I'm not doing podcasts. And so I give it to you with my professional judgment, my understanding and comprehension of the data points, and then bring you that analysis in a way I hope you find entertaining and you can understand. And if you like this kind of hot take, you can give me a thumbs up. It helps with the quantity and the quality of the hot takes. And then every week we do a midweek and weekend edition of a very popular legal and political podcast called Legal AF, also only on the MeidasTouch network. And then if you like what I'm doing, you can follow me, Michael Popok, on all things social media at MS Popok. This is Michael Popok, Legal AF reporting.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.